Hello, wine lovers! I'm Raslava, sommelier and wine educator, your guide on this journey through the world of wines, spirits, and cocktails. If you enjoy powerful, full-bodied, high-tannic red wines, Mourvedre is a grape well worth your attention. You may already know it, though perhaps under a different name. Mourvedre is a French name of this variety, and in France, it is the best known as a component of the famous Thousand Rhone blends, commonly referred as a GSM blends, after the first letters of Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvedre. It is also the backbone of the powerful red wines of Bandol in Provence. Under the same name, the variety is now known in the United States, South Africa, and several other countries. In Spain, the grape's homeland, it is called Monastrell. In Portugal and Australia, it goes by the name Matara. And these are the only three most widely used names. This variety has an astonishing number of synonyms, of which were deliberately hiding that it's the same grape. Indeed, for centuries, Mourvedre Monastrell Matara lived in the deep shadow of other, more fashionable varieties. Only now it is gradually stepping into the light. Interestingly, all its main names also originate from Spain. The French name Mourvedre most likely comes from the town of Provedre in Valencia, modern Sagunta, while Matara refers to the town of Matara in Catalonia. Both names quickly spread beyond Spain, where within the country the grape came to be known as Monastrell, meaning monastic, supposedly to avoid rivalry between the main growing areas. The origins of the variety itself disappear into antiquity. It is believed to have been brought to Valencia by the Phoenicians around 500 BC. Mourvedre is a grape of the hot, dry climates, and southeastern Spain suited it perfectly. Speaking of Spain, however, it is more appropriate to use its local name, Monastrell. Today, Monastrell is the fourth most widely planted red grape variety in Spain, and Spain still accounts for the vast majority of the world's planting, around 60,000 hectares out of a global total of roughly 77,000 hectares. A century and a half ago, Spain cultivated significantly more Monastrell, but first came the phylloxera epidemic in the late 19th century, which devastated European vineyards. While all varieties suffered, the only effective solution, crafting European wines onto phylloxera-resistant American rootstock, proved problematic for Monastrell, which took poorly to American roots. The issue was largely resolved after the Second World War, but by then many growers had replaced this demanding variety with others, which were easier and more productive, especially international grapes. This fascination with global varieties at the expense of native ones became the second major reason for the decline of Monastrell in Spain. As recently as the late 20th century, Monastrell covered around 100,000 hectares in Spain. By 2015, this figure has fallen to 43 hectares. Fortunately, this trend has not continued. Interest in Monastrell has been growing again, both in terms of quantity and, more importantly, quality. Traditionally, Monastrell was often used for inexpensive, frequently sweet wines. Today, it is more commonly the foundation of serious, high-quality dry wines. Most Monastrell is now growing along Spain's Mediterranean coast, particularly in the provinces of Valencia, Alicante, and Murcia, Humilia, and Eco, where it is the leading red variety. It is used to produce both full-bodied red wines and rosés. In several other regions, it is also grown in a minor blending component, adding structure and tannins to wines. In addition, Monastrell is among the grape varieties permitted for the production of cava, Spain's sparkling wine. Mourvedre arrived in France via Roussillon, where it had been planted no later than the 16th century. At that time, however, Roussillon was still Spanish territory and only became part of France in 1642. Along with the land, Mourvedre wines changed nationality as well. From there, the grape spread into Provence and the Rhone Valley. Further north up the road, Mourvedre did not go beyond Châteauneuf-du-Pape. It was already a bit too cool for variety even on the southern Rhone. but it was used in small quantities, usually no more than 5% in the classic Southern rum blend with Grenache and Syrah, primarily to add tannin and structure. Mourvedre truly found its ideal home in the warmer climate of Provence. Before phylloxera epidemic, it was the most widely planted grape variety in the region. Phylloxera devastated the vineyards of both Provence and Varon, and, as in the Spain, Mourvedre, poorly suited to crafting into American rootstock, was largely replaced by other varieties. The only vineyards to remain completely untouched were those of the Assis Bandol in Provence. Bandol's sandy soil successfully resisted phylloxera, which require clay, and the region became the stronghold and sanctuary for French Mourvedre. Today, Mourvedre is the leading grape in Bandol. Under Bandol-Assis regulations, red wines must contain at least 50% Mourvedre and Rosé at least 20%. In practice, the proportions are often higher, with small addition of Grenache and Cinsault most commonly used as blending partners. By the mid-20th century, the problem of crafting Mourvedre onto American rootstocks had largely been solved, and the grape began to reclaim its place in French vineyards. Growing global interest to the variety played its part as well. Climate changes has also helped Mourvedre to ripen more reliably not only in the south but in the Rhone Valley too. As a result, planting increased and the average proportion of Mourvedre in blends rose to around 10%. Some producers went much further. For example, the Chateau de Becastel Mourvedre can account up to 30% of a blend. Languedoc-Roussillon also expanded its Mourvedre plantings, mainly using its red and rosé blends. Forcing oriental wines are produced there as well. In the 1960s, Mourvedre covered only about 100 hectares in France. Today, it occupies around 10,000 hectares, and interest to the grape continues to grow. In the United States, Mourvedre arrived in California in the 1860s under the name Matara, as a part of a collection assembled by the Pellier brothers. This collection has a fascinating story of its own. Louis Pellier, the son of a French winemaker, arrived in San Francisco in 1849 in search of gold and the prosperous new American life. Observing the poor state of California's food supply, he quickly changed course. He brought in his brothers and returned to France to assemble a collection of agricultural plants, including numerous grape varieties that could thrive on California's climate. The brothers made several such trips, established nurseries, enriched California's orchards and vineyards, improved the food supply for the local residents, and, not least, did very well for themselves financially. Mourvedre was among the grapes they brought back. Under the name Matara, it was planted quite extensively in California, but used almost exclusively for inexpensive bulk and box wine blends. By the mid-20th century, plantings declining sharply. When, in 1980s and 90s, thanks to the effort of Ron Rancher, a group of American winemakers dedicated to promoting Rhone varieties, Matara reclaimed its French name Mourvedre and found its way to the hands of serious producers. Surviving plenty of century-old vines were discovered and restored, and the new vineyards were planted alongside them. Following California, the state of Washington also developed a serious interest in Mourvedre. Today both states actively grow the grape, producing both GSM blends and single oriental wines. The Australian story of Mourvedre closely mirrors the American ones. It arrived in Australia in 1833 as part of a famous collection brought by James Busby, the father of Australian winemaking. Among the 650 wine cuttings Busby collected in Spain and France was Mourvedre. In Australia, it became known as Matara, although in recent years more and more producers have been switched to the French name. The most significant plantings are found in Barossa Valley and McLaren Vale. Initially, Matara was used for inexpensive blends and fortified wines in a port-like style. As in California, demand for cheap Matara wines eventually faded, and many vineyards were uprooted. But over to the end of the 20th century, producers reconsidered. The remaining old wines were preserved and higher quality wine began to appear, primarily GSM blends and blends with Shiraz. Beyond whiskey region, Mourvedre has also established itself in South Africa, Italy, and Israel, gradually expanding its presence and reputation across the global wine landscape. As I mentioned earlier, Mourvedre needs a hot, dry climate. It flowers and ripens late, demanding plenty of sun and warmth, and it does not tolerate low winter temperatures. Overall, this is not an easy grape to grow. Mourvedre is susceptible to fungal disease, so humid air is not its friend, but the dry heat suits it perfectly. At the same time, access to water or moderate irrigation is essential. So is careful vineyard work, reducing excess of yield and removing surplus leaves to expose the bunches to the sun. In short, the wine requires attention and effort before it rewards to a winemaker. The key characteristics of Oriental Mourvedre are deep color, powerful firm tannins, medium acidity, and usually fairly high alcohol. Fully ripe grapes accumulate a lot of sugar, which naturally translates into a higher alcohol, and growers typically aim to full ripeness, otherwise the wine could develop overly herbal green character. The strong, sometimes austere tannins call for aging, and Mourvedre clearly benefits from it. Interestingly, Mourvedre does not readily absorb oak aromas, so aging is often carried out in neutral oak barrels. The length of required aging depends on the region. In cooler France, Mourvedre may need years in barrel, while in hotter Spain, the tannins of Monastrell are softer from the start and the wine matures more quickly. Mourvedre has a pronounced and fruity profile, though its exact expression varies by region. Wines from France and Spain typically show black fruit aromas, blueberry, while Californian and Australian example lean more toward to red fruits such as plum and cherry. Floral notes of violet and lavender are common, such as herbs and spices like thyme and the black pepper, along with chocolate and earthy notes reminiscent of pebble and dry soil. One particularly recognizable hallmark of Mourvedre is its gamey or red meat note. This is especially characteristic of the Old World wines and of young example. With aging, these aromas tend to evolve into the liver and tar. This gamey character, along with Mourvedre's complex earthy and herbal nuances, is the result of a grape's tendency to produce volatile sulfur compounds during winemaking. Different grape varieties have different levels of this tendency, and Mourvedres are relatively higher. The formation of volatile sulfur compounds is traditionally classified as a wine fault, but the definition is not entirely accurate. Depending on the specific compounds and their concentration, this can be a flaw or a feature. In English language wine literature, this phenomenon is often referred as a reduced wine. Here, reduced is used in a chemical sense, compounds bound with hydrogen, as opposite to the oxidized, bound with oxygen. So, if you come across the term reduced wine, it refers to a wine containing volatile sulfur compounds. The most basic of these compounds is hydrogen sulfide. It is produced primarily by yeast during fermentation, when nitrogen is insufficient or conditions are stressful. This is a normal part of fermentation, and volatile hydrogen sulfide usually escapes into the air. When it falls toward to the end of fermentation or during least aging, however, the wine may develop aromas ranging from stagnant water to rotten eggs, depending on concentration. This is a solvable issue. Decant the wine and the smell will disappear. Hydrogen sulfide also can form in the bottle sealed with closure that allows virtually no oxygen ingress. Over time, hydrogen sulfide present in the wine can react with other molecules to form mercaptans and disulfides. When present below the threshold, these compounds contribute complexity rather than flaws. Mercaptan can add notes of smoke, struck matches, and burned sugar. Disulfides may evoke aromas of truffle, asparagus, corn, game, and more. Many winemakers working with sulfur-prone varieties factor this into their stylistic decision. The key is the balance, keeping concentration below a point where character turns into the defect. But back to Mourvedre. It is the best served very slightly chilled, around 60-80 degrees centigrade, so that the relatively high alcohol does not overpower the wine's aromas. Give it instantly state over to full compounds, decanting is highly recommended. Powerful, full-bodied and high in tannins, Mourvedre is naturally partner for the meat: steak, lamb ribs, barbecue, roasted duck. Herbs such as lavender, rosemary and thyme complement it beautifully. It also pairs well with dishes featuring eggplants, legumes, mushrooms, as well as olives, aged cheeses, and cured meats. Today I have a pure variant of Mourvedre from Washington State. Eisenhower Cellar, Walla Walla, 2019. I really love this winery. Their wines always delight me. Eisenhower Cellar is a small, family-owned winery founded in 1999. They work extensively with front grape varieties and with front blends. Single variant Mourvedre is not very common in Washington. It is usually used in blends here. This wine is a great opportunity to try it on its own. The grapes are grown in Wallula Vineyard, located in the steep rocky slope overlooking the Columbia River. The vines were planted in 2001. 30% of whole clusters were included in fermentation. The wine was aged for 18 months in French oak, in which 12% was new. Let's try it. This one for you, this one for me. Cherry, blueberry, sage, black pepper, truffle, note of smoked meat. Full-bodied with powerful ripe tannins. Cherry, black pepper, dry herb of Provence. Note of roasted meat. Pleasant long finish. A very good representative for the variety. Stay with me, subscribe to my channel. Feel free to ask questions and don't hesitate to support me. Sante!